I'm Allison Cochran. I'm a wildlife biologist with the USDA Forest Service here on the Bankhead National Forest in Winston County, and we are proud to bring you virtual fawn today from the Houston Recreation Area on Smith Lake. And with me is my colleague, Matt Brock. Matt?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Brock. I'm also a wildlife biologist with the Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries.
In cooperation with the Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division on the Black Warrior Wildlife Management Area. There's about 90,000 acres there of public land, all available for hunting, recreation, outdoor recreation, fishing, camping, hiking, mountain biking, horse riding. These are your public lands, and we're just managing them, and in our jobs particularly managing the wildlife and the wildlife habitat for you all, for future generations.
Yeah, and speaking of public land hunting, I think it's very important for people to understand where funding comes from for us to be able to manage these lands and to provide these programs for the public.
Yes,
and the biggest source of funding that we receive is through Pittman Robertson funding that comes from the Pittman Robertson Act of 1937. It was an act passed by Congress, and what it is an excise tax on hunting equipment, guns, and ammunition. And that funding is allocated to the states. Our other funding source comes from license sales. So when you purchase a hunting or fishing license, that money goes directly to our agency so that we can fund programs that benefit the resources of the state of Alabama. So you may ask, what does a wildlife biologist do? Well, we're responsible for conservation of our natural resources. And we have natural resources all around us, from the water beside us. We're here at Smith Lake. Water is a natural resource. We have the timber resources, the wildlife resources, the soil, and the minerals below our feet are also natural resources. So we've been given the task of managing these resources in a sustainable way. So my definition that I like to use of conservation is to be a wise steward of our natural resources.
That's a lot of words, Matt. What's a wise steward?
A wise steward. Well, I was hoping that maybe some of the people watching this video could tell me what it means to be wise. A wise person is someone who makes good decisions with the knowledge that they have. So you can be a smart person and a knowledgeable person and be unwise if you make poor decisions. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So a wise person is going to take the knowledge they have to make really good decisions. So we have to look at science and see what science tells us, and we also have to take public input. So between the science and the public input, we have to make those merge together so that we manage these resources that benefits everyone in our society.
And Matt, how's that different? We talk about conservation, but you also hear about preservation.
Yes.
And we're in the business of conservation, and how's that different from preservation?
So the simplest way to explain this would be a conservationist is someone who is an active manager of the landscape. So we actually do things to the landscape, manipulate the landscape that benefit wildlife. And in preservation, you just kind of take a hands-off approach.
What is the difference between game and non-game? I'm hoping that we have some people out in the audience at school there that like to hunt and fish, and those folks probably already know the difference between non-game and game, but let's touch on that. Let's talk about some of our favorite game animals.
All right, so a game animal is one that is hunted, okay? There's seasons and bag limits and regulations on those. Non-game animals would be those that we do not hunt. So to give you an example, this is a white-tailed deer. And this is the #1 game species in the southeastern United States. So a lot of people hunt white-tailed deer, and this is the #1 license sale as well. So when people buy a hunting license, they're primarily buying to hunt white-tailed deer. Now, this is a skull from a deer that I found that died of natural causes. White-tailed deer will shed their antlers every year.
Is that an antler or is that a horn?
A lot of people call these horns. That deer had big horns, Allison.
That's
big
what
horns.
I hear, but that's in fact not the case. These are antlers.
Right, so antlers are cast every year. In other words, they fall off. So in the spring, late winter and early spring, their antlers will fall off, and then shortly thereafter they will begin regrowing new antlers, and they have this velvet on the antlers is full of tiny capillaries carrying a lot of nutrients and blood to those antlers. They grow very rapidly. All right, so in the fall, the velvet sheds off, and then you're left with a hardened antler, like these deer here have. And those are the antlers are important for.
What are antlers used for? Why
Well,
why do bucks have antlers?
They use those antlers to fight each other for dominance, for breeding rights. They use them to rub trees, and what they're doing, they'll actually take the antler and they'll scrape the bark off the tree, a small tree, and then they will deposit their individual scent from a forehead gland, and that's how they can communicate to each other. They're not able to communicate verbally like we are most of the time. There's a few verbal communications that they can use through grunting, but a lot of times they use their nose to communicate with each other.
Amazing creatures. And again, Alabama's #1 game animal.
Yep.
But close behind is another amazing and beautiful creature. What do we have here?
That would be an eastern wild turkey.
This is a fan of tail feathers.
Yep.
What can we learn? One thing that wildlife biologists do is we have to determine what kind of animals are found in the area where we're working and monitor their populations. And we have a lot of clues to how we, learn about what animals are here. We listen to their sounds, look for their signs, look at their feathers or their skulls, things we're talking about to you today. And we can learn something about individuals or the sex or the species from these characteristics. So what can we learn from just this turkey fan about this animal?
Well, I can look at the tail feathers and I can tell you that it is from an adult gobbler. And the reason I know that is because all the feathers are the same length all the way across. So before a turkey reaches his second birthday, he's going to replace all of his feathers with adult feathers. And prior to that, when they're young, the center feathers along the center here, they're going to be longer by about 1 inch to 1.5 inches than the ones on the side. So he'll replace those before his second birthday. Now, a young male turkey is called a jake, and an adult male turkey is called a gobbler or a tom. And I've got a few examples here.
Yeah, what's another way we can tell turkeys' age and sex?
Most male turkeys have spurs. I've seen very few that did not have them, but most of them have spurs. And you can see that's the small bump just above the foot there. That's the spur from a young male turkey. And then here is a spur from an adult male turkey. And you can see that they get longer as they age. They get sharper, and they're used for fighting and also establishing dominance. Now, y'all may have seen a turkey out in a field before strutting his stuff. And what he's trying to do is attract a female. Okay, so they attract females in the spring. They breed, and she's going to lay eggs. And those eggs are laid on the ground. They're not like most birds that have nests up in the canopy somewhere or along brush. They're going to lay their eggs in a nest on the ground, which makes them extremely susceptible to predation. And we've got several predators that we'll talk about here later. But if you're a female turkey, you've got to sit on those eggs for how many days, Allison? Do you know?
Absolutely. How many? About a month.
It's about a month. That's exactly right. So you're looking at about 28 days they have to sit on these eggs.
This is really one thing that is important for wildlife managers to consider. Wildlife biologists, we have to be sure that we're and landowners who are managing their land for turkey or other wildlife, you have to make sure that we provide quality turkey nest and habitat where she does have some protection and availability to close by food sources, so she doesn't have to travel a great distance in order to go search for food and leave those eggs vulnerable. Right?
Exactly. And there's several things that landowners can do to increase turkey habitat. And naturally, I'll give you an example. A good area that a turkey would find a nest is when a storm comes through and blows down a large oak tree. That turkey may nest somewhere around that tree because it's provided a forest opening where sunlight can reach the ground and brush begins to grow. So she's going to find a place that gives her some vertical structure that protects her from predators and kind of shields them from being able to see her.
While we're on turkey talk, what are these things here you want to share with us?
All right,
what's
so
that?
Are y'all aware that turkeys have beards? Now I've got a little goatee here. I don't know if you can call it a full beard. But is their beard located on their chin like mine? What do you think, Allison?
What do you guys think? Who's seen a gobbler out there with a big long beard? Where's
it
that
here?
thing growing from?
It's not growing from here.
It's not, you're right.
It grows right in the middle of their chest, okay? So a young turkey called a Jake, he's going to have a smaller beard, and as he grows, his beard will get longer, and the average length on a adult male turkey is going to be somewhere between 9 and 11 inches. All right, so they grow these beards, and they do wear, and they break off on the tip.
It's
And
not a
that's-
feather.
No, it's not a feather. It's just long strands of the same fibrous material that you can see there. And it's just long strands. It looks almost like hair. All right, now, biologically, do we really know why they have a beard, Allison?
That's a great question. I surely don't know.
I don't know either.
None of us do.
So, if you aspire to be a well-known turkey biologist, maybe one day you can
Figure
that
out
out.
why a turkey grows a beard. Now, does a hen ever have a beard?
Every now and then you will see hens that do have beards. They're generally a little more narrow, and they look kind of stringy, like like spaghetti noodle. You know, they're not going to be thick and full like a male turkey beard.
So while we were talking about turkeys and nesting on the ground, there are several important species of birds, game and non-game in Alabama, that nest on the ground. The Bobwhite Quail is another one that people love to hunt. That's a ground nester. And strong runners, birds that don't really do a whole lot of flying, right? They do fly up to roost, of course, turkeys do, but we'll talk about, we mentioned this term predator. All right, so talking about predators, animals that hunt and prey on other animals. We have some examples here of things that are a few of our top predators, and definitely like to eat turkeys, turkey eggs, and other small mammals in the forest like squirrels, rabbits. What do we have here, Matt? That
Well,
is something, gosh, what do we have?
It looks a little different, don't it?
Doesn't that look different? And I hear about these in this area so many times. People ask me, is that a wolf?
Right.
Did I see a wolf? Nope. Not here in Winston County, you did not.
So this is a large male coyote, and they actually came here from the western states many years ago. We used to have the eastern red wolf
We did.
in
They're
Alabama.
extinct.
Yep, they were extirpated many years ago, so in their absence, the coyote decided that he would cross the Mississippi River, come over here, and they have taken up permanent residence.
That's right.
So this one in particular is called a melanistic coyote, and the reason it is melanistic is inside the skin cells and the hair cells, they have color pigments. And melanin is the one that decides how dark or how light the hair is. So this one has an excess of melanin. That's why it is much darker than most coyotes that you see.
And you have melanistic critters in all sorts of wildlife, not just in coyotes. You can see it in snakes. I often see, one of my favorite snakes is a hognose snake here in Alabama.
Yes.
And I get them a lot around here that are almost black. And that's the same thing going on.
Yep.
The opposite of that, of course, is leucistic. You can have very light or white versions of critters as well. And that's what I have here is just a coyote skull. And we know this is a predator for very many reasons. How are some ways we know? What do the teeth tell us that let us know that this is a predator? As opposed to something that doesn't grab and snatch and rip and tear.
If you look at those long canine teeth, the ones up front, top and bottom, those are called canines. And they use those for catching their prey and ripping flesh and crushing bone. And that is a well-known characteristic of a predator. So if you find a skull and you want to know if it's predator or prey, you can generally look at those teeth and it will tell you a lot about that.
This one is a similar, pretty common predator in here in Alabama. And we can tell it as well. We've got these forward-looking eyes. We've got these canine teeth, incisors.
And that would be a bobcat. So if you'll look at the coloration on the bobcat, they have many colors ranging from light to dark. and they blend in really well with the forest floor. Also in grassy situations where there's a lot of grass along the forest floor, they can slip around and sneak up on turkeys. They can sneak up on just about anything.
Rabbits.
Yep, I've had them sneak up on me while I was turkey hunting before.
And we call those fur bearers. They are also, while they're predators, they're also considered species of game because people trap them. There used to be a great, and maybe it's coming back up, a great interest in trapping for animals' pelts to keep people warm back in the olden days. And there's a number of ways that people who are interested can learn how to trap fur bearers. So bobcat is a common one. Beaver is another. Mink, of course. Yep. Mink coats used to be all the rage.
Yep, raccoons and otters.
Raccoons, the coonskin cap, otters, those are all fur bearers that are very important in the trapping industry. And probably, finally, we may just be running out of time. As you can tell, Matt and I like to talk about wildlife. We think it's our greatest natural resource in Alabama and encourage you to learn more about it. Reach out to us. Take up hunting if you haven't, learn to fish, go bird watching, enjoy nature in the national forests, the wildlife management areas. These are your public lands. But I guess one final note we'll leave you with is just to make sure that you all know the components of wildlife habitat and the things that we're managing for out here in the forest to make sure that they're available for all species that we have here. And so I'm going to give you a minute to study up and go do some quick research and tell us what are the four components of wildlife habitat. And those are...
One of the most important ones for me, because it's approaching noon,
is food.
Yes, absolutely.
And in the hot sun, you think of the second one, water. Space.
Space is how all those things are arranged.
And the shelter.
And I like to have shelter.
Absolutely. And so food, water, shelter, and space, or how the arrangement is another word for space, how those things are in relation to each other. And so you think about something like a white-tailed deer that can run through the forest and has a huge home range, lives on, easily, several hundred acres, if not more. His water can be... He can feed on acorns and some greenbrier. We'll go look at these things out here. And that doesn't necessarily have to be very in close proximity to his water source where he's drinking out of a creek, right? Because he's very mobile. And the same, necessarily with a little bird. It can fly from its nest, a decent distance away to find the insects or the berries that it's feeding on, the seeds, and get its water source. But we have to consider that arrangement and how far away. So what are some other examples of shelters? We said trees, of course, provide shelter. Trees are important shelter for so many species, especially insects, birds, and bats. But what are some other kinds of shelter that...
Well, I'm still thinking about trees. If one of those large cavity trees falls to the ground, it immediately becomes shelter for terrestrial amphibians
salamanders.
And reptiles. Yep.
Absolutely.
The
root holes even.
Yes.
Snakes love to get down in the root holes. So trees are such great value, and that's one reason that we're so blessed in Alabama to have as many forests, many acres of forest as we do, providing important wildlife habitat.
Yep, and another one that comes to mind real quickly for small mammals would be briar thickets. We look at briar thickets and we think, wow, what could that possibly do for wildlife? But if you're a rabbit that likes to graze on grass and clover out by a briar thicket and you see a hawk overhead, you can immediately retreat to that briar thicket and receive the shelter, the cover that you need. So
another great example of shelter that we have here that isn't in everywhere in Alabama is an abundance of caves. Caves provide shelter for certain bats and many other species of wildlife, and some animals that are only found in caves. We also want to finally touch on the importance of streams. Alabama is really lucky and rich with aquatic wildlife, many kinds of species, like the flattened musk turtle and black warrior water dog that are found in the streams up here in Winston County that aren't found anywhere else in the state of Alabama. So we would just be remiss if we didn't mention the abundance of aquatic wildlife, crayfish, fish, many special things found nowhere else on earth that we all should be proud of and learn more about. Thank you for your time and interest.